because the present Israeli regime will not allow such a thing. It will allow one state, but without equal rights to the Palestinian Arabs. And they know that in the long run it is impossible to maintain this without ethnic cleansing. So this is the Zionist one state. An anti-Zionist one state would require overthrow of the Zionist regime. Question is, who is able to do it?
Het is zondag 25 november en dit is Linkse Hobby's, podcast van Authentiek Links. Vandaag hebben we ons laatste interview van de Communist University van de afgelopen augustus. Met niemand minder dan Moshé Machover. De van oorsprong Israëlisch communist, oprichtend lid van Matzpen, voert een uitgebreid vraaggesprek met Gus van Utrecht en mijzelf over Israël, maar ook over de heksenjacht in de Labour Party. Ik wil, voordat we beginnen, nog even kort stilstaan bij hoe je ons kunt helpen om deze podcast verder te ontwikkelen. Geef ons feedback via linkshobbies.nl/contact of schrijf een recensie op iTunes, zodat ook andere mensen ons kunnen vinden. Deel hem in je vriendenkring op Facebook en Twitter. En als je de mogelijkheid hebt, steun ons dan ook financieel of via linkshobbies.nl/doneren. In navolging van het Britse Novara Media roepen we op om ons te steunen met 1 uur loon per maand, zodat wij in 2019 serieuze stappen kunnen maken om deze podcast verder te ontwikkelen.
Okay, so we're here today with Moshé Machover. He's been active politically since the 1960s, if not before. He comes from Israel and was active in the beginning in Matzpen. Moshé, could you tell a little bit about Matzpen and what distinguished it politically from other Israeli leftist organizations?
Okay. I mean, my political history didn't start with Matzpen. It started long before. First of all, I was in the youth movement. Which is a Zionist, trying to combine Zionism with Marxism. I was born, by the way, in 1936 in Palestine, as it was then. It was before Israel. Then, together with a few comrades there, we started to question some of the Zionist assumptions, so some of the Zionist components of this youth movement, and we were expelled. This was my first expulsion. I had 3 political expulsions, and then after some meandering, we joined the Israeli Communist Party, which was very traditional Stalinist party. To cut a long story short, because we don't have much time, by 1962, we became very critical of the Stalinism of the Communist Party. In fact, I'm talking about me together with some other comrades. We started to have doubts and criticism in 1956. That was when, the 20th Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, which was a big turning point and a lot of revelations, and we became critical. And so probably we would have been expelled from the Communist Party before, but in 1956, by the way, there are 2 things. First of all, Hungary, the invasion of Hungary, which made us more anti-Stalinist, but also the Suez War. And the Communist Party in Israel actually took a very good, decent line vis-à-vis that war. So that kept us in the party for a few years. But we started to debate and have criticism. To cut a longer story short, by 1962, the party discovered that we are having discussions with members of the party of other branches, which was absolutely forbidden. I don't know if you realize that in the traditional communist parties, you could obviously meet comrades from your own branch, but political discussion unauthorized by the bureaucracy with other branches, it was forbidden. They discovered that they expelled us, and then we founded it was initiated by 4 comrades, but then a few others joined us, and we established Matzpen. Matzpen was actually the name of the newspaper. The name of the group was the Socialist Organization in Israel. And our line was a critical, anti-Stalinist, Marxist viewpoint. We didn't quite realize it at the time, but we were part of a worldwide phenomenon of the 1960s, where a new, non-Stalinist left was emerging. I believe that the comrades here have a similar background, although they emerged from the British Communist Party later. But but in the 60s, it was a general process. We didn't quite realize it. We almost from the beginning, although the initiative was taken because of the segregation by branches, it was Hebrew-speaking comrades, but we were joined by Arabic-speaking, so-called Israeli Arab comrades. So almost from the beginning, Matzpen was an internationalist party. To be fair, so was the Israeli Communist Party. It was at that time more than now. At the moment, what it became, the inheritor party of the Israeli Communist Party, is almost totally Arab. There are some few Jewish members. At the time when we were members, it was probably the other way around, or half-half. So, internationalism was not a problem for us. Okay, so that answers the first question.
Okay, and then, so Matzpen at the time got a lot of attacks from, because there was a lot going on in the 60s in Israel as well. It got a lot of attacks from the establishment in Israel as well. Why did Matzpen get attacked so much? What distinguished it politically?
This is a good question, but you are condensing the chronology. Actually, when Matzpen got formed, when it was created, when it came into being, fortunately, this was a few years after the Suez War and a few years before the June War of 1967. In the history of the Israeli-Palestinian or Israeli-Arab conflict, this was the most quiet period. There was no, people thought, things have normalized, nothing is going to happen. Zionism has fulfilled its mission, and so this actually, fortunately, it gave us time to prepare. We were not at that time when Matzpen was created. We were not under attack. We were almost totally ignored. But we had the quiet time to cook our ideas slowly and get a perspective. You see, we were expelled from the Communist Party before we planned to create. Eventually, we wanted to create a group, an anti-Stalinist, Marxist revolutionary group, but we wanted to cook our ideas before, but we were preempted by the party that expelled us. So at that period, we developed a theoretical understanding of the situation there. We began to understand more deeply than at that time was accepted by the Communist Party. The Communist Party had forgotten what it knew in the 1920s about the colonizing nature of the conflict. This is a conflict of colonization between the Zionist project of colonization and the indigenous Palestinian Arab population. They had forgotten, but we, with the help of, because of our internationalist composition membership, it was easy for us to slowly, work out the situation. And we did not think that everything was solved, the situation that existed was final, because we realized that the Zionist nature of Israel has not changed. Of course, we did not specifically anticipate the 1967 war, but we were, if you like, theoretically, ideologically ready for such a thing. When the war happened, and we were immediately ready to come out with what I would now still regard as absolutely correct position against it. This is a colonialist kind of war. Immediately withdraw from the demand, immediately withdraw from the occupied territories, etc., etc. This put us in a pandemonium of attacks, right? Because as in every patriotic war, the atmosphere of most people, we know this from historical experience, they become hysterical, and we were then. So what you are asking about being attacked, then after 1967, we were viciously and universally attacked, but we were ideologically ready. We had the fortunate experience of having a few years to work out our positions before the storm broke.
So you mentioned the position of Matzpen that it was a colonial project, Israeli state. How would you assess the current situation in Israel with the nation-state laws, I believe they're called? How would you assess what's going on right now in Israel?
Well, I would say it's the same, but more. More of the same, but amplified. And as long as the conflict is not resolved, it is getting worse. I should add that we already before the 1967 war, and there is documentary evidence for this, we were more precise in defining the exact nature of Zionist colonization. Because, and this is very important to understand, and a lot of people, even on the left, don't understand this. Not all colonizations are the same. There are basically several models, but the two main models is one, if you like, represented by South Africa, and the other representing, if you like, by Australia. They're two different. So what is the difference? The difference in South Africa, the settlers, there were a fairly large number of European settlers. They depended, their economic system, their political economy depended on exploiting the labor power of the indigenous people. They were needed. Kautsky made this distinction between two main types of colony. He called this exploitative colonies. By the way, he misdiagnosed South Africa. He thought that South Africa belonged to the other type, which he called work colonies. In work colonies, like in Australia, the main production is done by the settlers. What happens to the indigenous population? They are surplus to requirement. They normally, in such situations, they are ethnically cleansed. There are places like Tasmania, near Australia, part of Australia, where all the indigenous population was exterminated completely. Maybe one or two were left. This is extreme. But in Australia itself, in North America, less brutally, even in New Zealand, because there are degrees of brutality, but the basic model was the same. The native population was pushed out, excluded. In some cases exterminated, in some cases ethnically cleansed. In the case of New Zealand, marginalized. It was, relatively speaking, and you have to stress this, less brutal. Now, Zionist colonization consciously, deliberately, knowingly followed this second model of colonization. The indigenous population was not to be exploited. They tried to prevent. There were individual employers among the Zionist settlers who preferred to employ Palestinian Arab labor. It was cheaper for them. It was, and if it was an agricultural farm, these people were experienced peasants, many of them. So they knew the work better. But the Zionist organization, and especially the so-called socialist Zionists, prevented it. So when it comes, to calling, I'm saying all this because you can see how all this developed in the period since 1967 until now. Everything is moving in the same direction but intensifying. So the exclusion of the indigenous Palestinian people. There is some employment of Palestinian labor outside Israel itself, but it is marginal. Inside Israel, there's 20% of the population are Palestinian Arabs. They are employed. Of course, relatively their position is worse. I mean, their employment has worse conditions, etc., but they are employed. But the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, in the West Bank, very few are employed in the Israeli economy. They are surplus to requirement. They are always threatened with ethnic cleansing. I should also mention the part that Israel annexed in 1967. It didn't annex the West Bank. It didn't annex the Gaza Strip, which are densely populated by Palestinians. They want land, but not people, not indigenous people. They are surplus to requirement in this model of colonization. They annexed Jerusalem for ideological, religious reasons, but one territory that is not mentioned very often is the Syrian Golan Heights, which they annexed. But before annexing it, they ethnically cleansed it. They expelled the majority of the population, with the exception of people of the Druze religion. It's a complicated thing, but the Druze they are a religious sect which are heretical from Islam. I mean, they were seceded. They split from Islam, and they are considered heretical by Muslims. Israel classifies them as not Arab. So they were allowed to remain, and they are treated somewhat differently. But all these processes intensified gradually. The colonization, because Zionism is fundamentally a project of colonization. Israel is a result, a fruit of this project, but at the same time an instrument for extending it. Until 1967, the colonization went inside. In other words, those Palestinians that were not ethnically cleansed in 1948, that escaped somehow by luck or by accident, were not among the majority of Palestinians that in what became Israel that were expelled, but remained. Their lands were being taken away. and colonized by Jewish settlements. Until 1966, the Palestinian citizens of Israel were living under military rule. They were not allowed to move freely and so on. This was removed in 1966, but then the same regime, but harsher, was imposed in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank. And the process of colonization, of putting settlers, Jewish Israeli settlers in these acquired territories, started right from the beginning, from a few months after the war stopped in 1967. This is intensified more and more. One process that we probably did not anticipate. We anticipated that colonization, if it is not stopped, the Zionist colonization will try to grab as much, and we anticipated and predicted that it will become, oppression causes resistance, resistance intensified the repression, and then there is going to be terror and counter-terror. We said from the beginning that this is what you have to expect. What we did not explicitly expect, but what in retrospect is not surprising, is the growing influence of extreme nationalist religion. We did not anticipate, you see, because in 1967, Israel was predominantly, the Jewish section, so-called, predominantly secular. Religious, observant people, Orthodox religious people were a minority and not too influential, apparently not influential, although they had a lot of influence, but it was not very explicit. And anyway, the majority, did not consider them important. Increasingly, from 1967, and this is going on and on and on until today, the influence of Jewish religion in its most conservative, conservative not in the there is a denomination, Jewish denomination that calls itself conservative. Actually, relatively, they are less conservative than what is prevailing in Israel, which is a combination of extreme literal religion, dogmatic, and very conservative also socially, respect to women and so on, combined with virulent chauvinism, nationalism. I can see now the reason why this is happening, but this is a process that has been going on and being intensified, and it is finding also expression in the new nation-state law.
Yeah, you already mentioned your expulsions from different organizations earlier. Now, recently you got an expulsion from the Labour Party. I understand you've been reinstated by now. But how do you see that this whole campaign against anti-Zionist leftists within the Labour Party has been going on?
Yes, well, there is a slight technical point. I was not reinstated. The expulsion was rescinded. This is the legal difference. Reinstated means that for a time I was not a member of the Labour Party. Rescinded means that theoretically I was a member all the time, that the expulsion was void, null and void. It was so I continued to be. I didn't have to renew my membership. I was expelled on the 3rd of October 2017, and the expulsion was rescinded on the 30th of October, so 27 days I was being in an expelled state. Now, the expulsion was not explained, justified by accusations of anti-Semitism. It was the pretext was that I'm doing what I'm going to do today, that I speak in meetings organized by another political organization, that I publish articles in a paper. So what I will be doing today was the supposed pretext. But in the letter expelling me, there was an insinuation of anti-Semitism. That is to say, you have been accused. Something that you wrote has been somebody complained, and it's been. I mean, there was an insinuation of anti-Semitism. But this is not the reason we are expelling you, because while we were investigating this accusation, we discovered that you support another political organization. Now, my case in this respect was not alone. There was, and still going on, a witch hunt against the people on the left of the Labour Party, trying to get rid of whoever possible, especially under the previous secretary of the party, general secretary, like Stalin, just general secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. The Labour Party had Ian McNicol, who was a very unpleasant figure, right wing, and what he was trying to do is get rid of leftists. So all sorts of pretexts and insinuations of anti-Semitism wherever possible. The trouble with this expulsion was that the paragraph in the rules of the Labour Party, which was the pretext for my expulsion, does not specify what political organization one is not allowed to support and what support means. What does it mean? I mean, Corbyn has published many articles in Morning Star, which is a paper essentially belonging and expressing the Communist Party of Britain, the official Communist Party. Does it mean that he supports them? Well, and if he does, is it wrong? I mean, this paragraph is explicit and correctly so that if you support a candidate in an election that stands against a Labour Party candidate, then you must be expelled. This is normal, but there are many political organizations. There is a organization called Refuge, which is a political. It is political because it is engaged in defending battered women who are victims of violence in marriage and so on. Is it illegal in the Labour Party to support such a group? There is no list of what groups you are not allowed to support. There is a list of groups that are okay, that you are allowed to support, and these are groups affiliated to the Labour Party. Okay, well, that's normal. But there is no precise definition of what groups are prohibited. I mean, the CPGB is not listed as a prohibited. There's no listing. And they don't say what it means to support. So they could not sustain this expulsion, but probably they would have expelled me on some other pretext, if not for a big campaign, first of all within the Labour Party, also outside the Labour Party, and then internationally. It turned out that a lot of mathematicians, I'm a mathematician by academic occupation, and it turned out that a lot of mathematicians and scientists mobilized to protest against it. What is this strange thing? And I think that it is the big movement of protest inside and the Labour Party, outside the Labour Party and internationally, that made them rescind the expulsion. I think we should talk about the whole campaign of witchcraft, witch hunt against anti-Zionists and critics of Israel. Yeah. Okay. I mean, this is part of an ongoing. My expulsion was part of an ongoing campaign directed against Corbyn personally and against the left in the Labour Party. It is a complicated issue because it is combined. There are three causes, three components in the attack, three milieus of people that are involved in the attack, although there is some overlap between them, but the motivation varies. First of all, this is provable and there is a lot of evidence for it. There is an attack that is motorized, energized from Israel. It didn't start with Corbyn. It is an international campaign. There is a minister in the Israeli cabinet called Gilad Erdan. He is a minister of strategic affairs. This is the ministry that does this work of undercover operations, trying to undermine, to malign, to define all people who criticize Israel, especially people who subscribe to the BDS movement, boycott, divestment, and sanction, which they regard rightly as very dangerous, not so much economically, but politically and from the point of view of public relations. Israel suffers in the area of public relations because of what it does. And they want to fight it by besmirching, undermining, dirty tricks against people who are involved in this. And of course, in Britain, once Corbyn became head of the Labour Party, he was an obvious target. And there is evidence, both film, documentary film, secretly done by Al Jazeera in January 2017, showing how an Israeli agent is trying to undermine the left in the Labour Party, infiltrating, doing all sorts of strange things in collaboration with Labour Friends of Israel and the pro-Zionists inside the Labour Party. So this is one direction. Then there are the rightists in the Labour Party who really don't care a fuck about Israel or Palestinians or Zionism or anti-Semitism. They just want to destroy Corbyn because they regard the Labour Party as their property, and here comes this parvenu from the left and taking our party away from us. This is the way they think, and they regard him as a dangerous infiltrator into the Labour Party. They try to reclaim their lost territory. They join in this because they notice that this campaign besmirching the left and Corbyn personally as anti-Semitic, that it is working and that he begins to apologize for it and retreating. It doesn't fight back, so they joined it. And beyond this, there is a third element. There is the establishment, the British establishment, part of it in the Labour Party, but part of it in the state establishment, that is very worried that a possible Prime Minister of Britain might not toe the traditional line, which is Britain following in the footsteps of the United States, being, one of the so-called international community, which means the camp followers of the United States. Part of it in the Middle East is to support Israel because Israel is a strategic asset of the United States especially, but of, Western imperialism generally. And so to be critical of Israel is unacceptable to them. They want to get rid of this. They use the idiotic equation of anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. This is a paralogism, as we logicians call it. Paralogism, it is a false use of logic. Zionism is a political ideology and a political project. Israel is a political entity. Being opposed to it is taking a political position. Anti-Semitism is a form of racism. It is being hostile or hating a group of people because of what ethnic or religious or whatever group they belong to. It's two totally different things. It is a conflation, a mistake of categories. Two things that don't belong together. So, but they confuse the public. Mind you, a lot of Jews, not all, but many Jews have become, over the years, convinced Zionists, and they regard Zionism as part of their, as it were, Jewish identity. So a lot of individual Jews, when they hear Israel attacked or Zionism attacked, they take it as an attack on their Jewishness. But this doesn't mean that it's true. I'm sure that many Muslims, if they hear attacks, political attacks, criticism of Saudi Arabia, they may regard it as being Islamophobic. But of course, this is not the case, except if you are doing an Islamophobic critique of Saudi Arabia. But if you say that it is a repressive regime, that is reactionary and so on, it doesn't mean that you're Islamophobic. But I'm sure that there are some Muslims who will take it this way.
I would like to have two more questions, and then we are basically running out of time. So, going back to Israel, the Matzpen group had a kind of solution that is quite different from what is currently regarded as the solution, as one state or two state. Mm-hmm. Could you perhaps elaborate on that?
Okay. Yes, I've written about it and explained, and this was sort of our guiding idea from the beginning. There is no easy solution, and the reason is if let us say it had been like South Africa, colonization of that type that I spoke about before, or like Algeria, where the settlers are a minority, the indigenous people are a big majority, and the settlers cannot indefinitely keep the indigenous population down because they need them also. So that allows for a kind of decolonization as happened in Algeria or in South Africa. There are two different ways. In Algeria, in the end, a lot of the settlers simply had to leave or were expelled. In South Africa, they remained, but they lost their political privileges, not their economic privileges, right? So that was, if you like, a kind of what some people would define as a bourgeois democratic transformation. That is to say, it remained a capitalist country, but its political structure was changed in favor of the indigenous people. Now, if you look at the situation in Israel-Palestine, it's very different. It is also different from other places where there is a similar model of colonization in Australia, North America, where the demographic balance was the opposite. The indigenous population became a small minority. In those places, there was no decolonization. The indigenous people, if they remained at all, lost their land. They became pulverized. They remained minorities in settler population. In Israel, for reasons that are too complicated to explain in a few minutes, the situation is exceptional. Unlike the one or the other, the ethnic demographic balance is neither a huge majority of indigenous people nor a huge majority of settlers, but more or less half and half. So this is one thing that you have to remember. People who I would say, first of all, morally speaking, any solution, any situation which would result in equal rights to both national groups that exist there, and I mean the Palestinian Arab nation and the Israeli Jewish, the so-called Israeli Jewish, which I think should be named Hebrew, which is a new nation created by colonization. Like in all places where this model of colonization took place, if you look at Australia, North America, etc., also in Israel, the settlers became a new nation. This is quite different from what Zionists claim, that Jews all over the world belong to a single nation. This is an ideological myth of Zionism. There is no such thing. Jewishness worldwide is a religion. I mean, this is what is common to all Jews is their religion or the religious background. But in Israel, has been created through colonization as a normal historical process, a new settler nation. Okay, so any situation that would give equal rights individually and nationally to these two groups would be morally okay, would be at least a big improvement on the existing situation. But let us see what is actually historically possible. For Marxists, it is not enough to, paint a desirable solution without pointing at social forces that are driving them. So I think the people who are still talking about a two-state solution are completely deluded. We, and I mean people in Matzpen, pointed out right from the beginning that Israel is not going to allow it. For reasons that I don't need to go into, but I mean, now I think it is clear to everyone that this Israel is simply done everything possible, including colonization of the Palestinian land in such a way that a two-state solution in any real sense, I mean, a Palestinian state that has any viability and sovereignty and possibility of existence as a real state. This is out of the question. Israel has done consciously everything that it could. And all major Israeli Zionist parties were partner to this. The difference was that the Likud and the so-called right wing, because they're all right wing, but the so-called right wing, Netanyahu and the crazies even to the right of him, declared from the beginning and worked openly to subvert, to undermine any possibility of a Palestinian state. The Labour Party, Israel's Labour Party, and its allies did it in an underhand way. They were more diplomatic in this way. They spoke, they extended more and more the so-called peace process, which they made sure was a process that goes on and on and on and on. It's like, two people having a discussion about how to divide a pizza. And one of them, while they are discussing, eats, one slice after the other of this pizza. This is the situation. Anyway, now I think it's official that the two-state solution is possible. One state, what would it take? I mean, one state. The Zionists also want one state. They want one state, including as much of the territory of pre-1948 Palestine, the Palestine under the British mandate, as much as possible, with as few Palestinian Arabs as possible. And this is what they are driving at. Eating more and more of this pizza, but doing it in such a way as trying to get rid of or get as much land and as few people as possible. Okay, so what is the other possibility is there? In this situation, the one-state solution that the good people are asking, that people, the anti-Zionists are asking, would require the overthrow of the Zionist regime. Because the present Israeli regime will not allow such a thing. It will allow one state, but without equal rights to the Palestinian Arabs. And they know that in the long run it is impossible to maintain this without ethnic cleansing. So this is the Zionist one state. An anti-Zionist one state would require overthrow of the Zionist regime. Question is, who is able to do it? What social force is able to do it? And here I think we cannot be optimistic, because it is not like in South Africa, that the majority of the people actually part of the political economy were the indigenous people who had an interest in transforming the situation. As far as I can see, no external force is able to overthrow the Zionist regime. It is a major power in the Middle East. It is a nuclear power. I mean, it's not realistic to think that it can be overthrown from the outside. It can be overthrown from the inside by its own people, by predominantly Jewish working class. But in the present situation, they have no motive for doing it. What would they gain? They are now an exploited class of a privileged nation. If in Israel would be a transformation like in South Africa, then they would be still exploited class, not part of a privileged nation. So why should they want to do it? So our perspective is that the problem will not be fundamentally resolved in a benign way, except in the long run, in a situation where the region is completely transformed. As part of a socialist transformation of the region, it is possible. Then, if, let us say, the regional working class gets power and invites the Israeli working class to join as part of a new class in power, a shared political power, that's a situation then the deal is very different. You lose your position as an exploited class in a privileged nation, and you lose your national privilege, but you become part of a powerful class, a class that is regionally in power. This is something that can be attractive. And there are some indications from previous mobilizations of the Israeli population that this can be attractive. For example, in 2011, when there were big demonstrations in Israel, there was very little involved, it was forbidden to talk about the occupation and so on, but there was enormous solidarity with the Egyptian and Syrian working class. Very explicit. So, I mean, this indicates that there is a possible way out. So what we were talking about from the beginning is that the problem will be resolved by integration of Israel in a regional socialist federation. Okay? On the basis of equal rights and on the basis of free choice. We cannot do it by compulsion. But let us not kid ourselves. This is not something that is going to happen in the very near future. It is, as the French say, it is a project of longue durée.
I see that we have run out of time. So last but not least, should people want to learn more about this, where can they have a look?
Well, first of all, I published a book containing essays that I have written and Matzpen documents ranging from 1966 to 2012. It's a volume called Israelis and Palestinian Conflict and Resolution. It was published by Haymarket, a left-wing publication based in Chicago. I've also written a lot of stuff after that, and much of it is in the archive of the Weekly Worker. If you go into the archive and look under my name, there is a list in reverse chronological order of articles that I have written over the years. So many things that we discussed are covered in much detail and with a lot of source material cited that people can find if they read English. Also, some of it is in the Matzpen website, Matzpen. There is an English language. Matzpen website is trilingual, Hebrew, Arabic, and English. And a lot of the material exists, especially the older material exists in, although Matzpen doesn't exist as an organization, the website is kept alive and still developed. And people who are old members of Matzpen contribute articles to it, so you can find stuff there as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Moshé. And of course, the links to the articles and a link to the book will be on the website. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Volgende week komt het Europees verkiezingsprogramma uit als concept en zullen we ons commentaar daarop geven. Deel 2 in onze serie Europa.